Hi friends, welcome back to the Bluegrass Sampler Quilt Along. I am so excited to be back with you today. I appreciate all of your kind comments on the videos and the postponement of the Sew Along for a month. I really appreciate your patience. It's been, a rough 6 weeks for our family, but personally, sewing and quilting is something that I've always used to help calm me down and give me, other things to think about and something else to dive into. So I am grateful to be back with you, back at my sewing machine and doing the things that I love to do. So this week we are going to be doing the applique parts of the block. So we're going to be doing a technique called raw edge applique. Let me hold this up. Hopefully the camera will focus there. So we're going to be doing raw edge applique. Raw edge applique means that the edge of the fabric is left raw. This is in contrast to needle turn applique, in which you hand sew it and use your needle to turn down the raw edge of the fabric so that it's finished on all sides. I am not going to show you needle turn applique, mostly because I am terrible at it. I have never been able to do it, and I'm not going to try and teach you something that I don't feel confident in doing myself. I personally have been using raw edge applique since I started quilting almost 20 years ago. My quilts get used and abused. I give them to kids and friends and babies, and I have not had a problem with the fabric fraying to the point that I felt like it was a detriment to the quilt. It will fray a little bit, but it will be minimal. I machine wash and dry my quilts. Like I said, it hasn't been an issue. I use a product called Heat and Bond Light. Heat and Bond is the brand name. And I think that product kind of helps to seal the edges of the fabric so that it deters the fabric from fraying on the edge a little bit. But you will get a little bit of fraying, which is okay. This is a, Bluegrass Charm fabric line was kind of inspired by the Bluegrass region of Kentucky. And I feel like a little bit of that texture that the thread gives, if it does fray, it just kind of adds to the charm of the quilt in this case, because it's not like a super formal, modern, polished quilt. So I feel like it kind of works with that. I don't know if you can see from here, but the horse blocks, I don't think you can see it. The horse blocks and the horseshoe blocks are what we're working on this week. On the Dresden blocks, you are also going to applique the Dresdens and the tails on the Dresdens to make them look like prize ribbons, but we are going to cover that part next week. We'll just make a whole Dresden block from start to finish, including the applique portion of those ribbons that hang off the bottom. So I will have you refer back to this video we're making today on how to make the ribbons for the Dresden. So if you want to go ahead and cut those out and prep them so they're ready for next week, then that would be great. But as far as like sewing them, we'll talk about that next week, because they have to get placed in a certain way that the Dresden covers the top of those two ribbon pieces. And one more thing before we get started, I actually had 2 sewing machines break this week. My main Bernina that I sew with and my long arm machine. I don't know what is going on. It was a bad week for technology in our house. My Bernina is going to be out for a little bit. User error. It's a great machine. Obviously something I did wrong, not the machine. And I'm sewing on my backup machine, which I'm so glad. I bought it on a whim. And I kind of was like, oh, I don't need 2 sewing machines, but I am so glad I have 2 sewing machines. So I'm sewing on a smaller Bernina, which is still a great sewing machine. I am just not used to it. It has the way you put the presser foot up is different. The thread, it doesn't have a thread cutter. All very minor things, which I realize I feel so silly complaining about that. But mine machine has the auto foot up and down. So what keeps happening is I keep forgetting to put the presser foot down, and I start sewing and then the presser foot's not down, so then the thread jams up and I have to rethread the machine. So just FYI, if it doesn't seem as polished as it normally does, the video sewing portions, that is why. Not that it's super polished to begin with, but I'm just thrown off a little bit by some of the different techniques of the machine. And also, as you know, If you've been quilting for a long time on your home machine that you sew with all the time, you know right where that 1/4 inch mark is. It's taken me a little while to kind of figure out exactly where I like my seams to line up to get that good scant 1/4 inch seam. But we're working with it. So please, I ask for just a tiny bit more patience from you as I sew this block that hopefully I don't mess up too bad. And if I do mess up, I'll show you how I fix it. As I said before, it just might not seem as polished. But it feels a little chaotic to me to be filming on that machine. So hopefully it doesn't come across that way to you guys too. So I am going to, as always, my sewing machine is over here. I'm going to switch all my cameras around, get a camera on my machine so you get a nice close up close view of what I'm working on, and switch to the overhead camera, and I'll go into a little bit more detail about the blocks that we're making today when I do that. Alright guys, let's start working on the applique portions of this quilt. I just want to show you on this diagram illustration, I think it's a little easier to see the portions of the quilt that are appliqued. So we're using a technique I think I mentioned called raw edge applique for this quilt, which means the edges of the fabric are left raw, but we do use interfacing so that they don't fray, or if they do fray, they fray minimally. That allows us to get more interesting shapes. So the horses, the horseshoes, and the tails on the Dresden blocks are all raw edge appliqued. We are not going to cover the raw edge on the Dresden blocks this week because we're going to talk about that next week when we actually make the Dresden blocks. So this week we're just going to concentrate on making the horses and the horseshoe blocks. And I'm going to walk you through making the horseshoe block today. I've got all of my pieces cut out. Just a reminder, I'm using the Bluegrass Charm collection by Riley Blake. It's my newest collection with them. I don't have any more fat quarter bundles, but I have quite a few custom bundles in the shop if you're still looking for the fabric. You can also find it at a lot of online retailers. And just another reminder, the fabric key is included in your pattern. If you bought a printed pattern, we have a color cutout. If you bought a digital pattern, there's also a color printout. So when I'm talking about fabric A, this is fabric A, this is fabric S, this is fabric N. So just so you know, as it's getting referred to in the pattern instructions. In the pattern, the instructions for the applique start on page 19 with the horses, but we're going to do the horseshoes today. So those start on page 20 of the printed pattern. If you have a digital pattern, it might be slightly different. And also you're going to need, at the end of your pattern, you've got to insert, you've got applique for horseshoes, applique for horse block 2 and horse block 1, which you can see they are mirror images of each other. That's why I included both of those for you, so you don't have to worry about mirroring that image. Then we've got our Dresdens, which we'll talk about next week, and the applique templates for the ribbon tails, which we will also talk about next week. So for right now, you just need one of the applique patterns, and like I said, we're going to work on the horseshoe. And as I mentioned earlier, I have my pattern pieces cut out. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a light box. If you don't have a light box, you can use a bright window, or you can use a clear glass casserole dish that you put upside down and put your phone under it with the flashlight on to make a light box. Since I have a light box, I'm going to use it. What you want to do is, one thing to remember with applique, the images always get reversed, which obviously doesn't matter with this horseshoe block because it's a mirror image, but like with the horses, or if you're dealing with letters, I've included the templates right side up the way you should trace them. Sometimes when you're working with applique patterns, the designer may mention for you to flip it over. So if you've done a lot of applique, you don't need to flip this over. You're just going to trace it the way it is. I'll turn on my light, and then I have a piece of Heat and Bond light. It is a paperback fusible web. So on one side we've got fusible, and on the other side we've got paper. You're going to place the fusible side down and the paper side up, and just use a pencil and trace Now that's traced, we are done with the light box and the pattern shape. Every package of Heat and Bond Light is going to have slightly different, or Heat and Bond Light is a brand name, but Paperback Fusible Web, depending on which one you're using, will have its own directions for setting it. So you'll want to refer to the package directions of how to set it. I'm going to try and set it using my smaller iron. I'm not sure it's going to work. I haven't tried it with my smaller iron, but I wanted to show you guys how this goes together, and I don't have a camera at my larger ironing board. So let's just see. So I kind of cut it out loosely first, and then this is my fabric that's cut in the pattern, the piece that's mentioned in the pattern, and I'm just going to make sure I put the shiny fusible side down and place it right on that pattern piece. If you're working with directional fabric, at this point you probably want to make sure your fabric is facing the way you want it to. And we'll just come to the iron and press. All right, and that actually did that little iron. This little Alicia did a pretty good job of that. So we're going to set it aside and let it cool. And next what you're going to do is you're going to cut out on the line, the drawn line. And I've got one that I've already cut out here. So this is one of the other fabrics. This one has already been cut out. I still have the paper on the back. So the next thing we need to do is apply it to our fabric piece. So this is the fabric piece, the background fabric piece that was in the pattern. And I just need to mark the center. So I'm just going to, with my fingers, fold that in half. Fold that in half. So now I have a visual of where the center is of this piece. And let me move my iron over. So if you can do this at your ironing board, the less you have to move this around, the less likelihood you've got of things not showing up where you want them to. I'm just going to peel off the back. Some of these are easier to peel than others. My experience, the Heat and Bond brand is the easiest to peel. I've had a few others that are not very fun to peel. So then I'm just going to, kind of using that as a guide, place that in the center of my block, and then we're going to do the same thing again. And you can see that that has fused this fabric to this fabric. You still need to sew it. There is a brand of Heat and Bond that's called Craft Bond that you can get away without sewing, but definitely in quilting, especially if the quilt will get washed, you're going to need to sew it. So let's move over to the sewing machine and I'll show you how to do applique stitches. All right, so I mentioned earlier that my regular sewing machine broke yesterday just as I was getting ready to film this, so I am sewing on my backup machine, which is still a great machine. It's a Bernina 350. I just don't have a lot of experience sewing on it, so if I kind of mess a few things up, please forgive me. But what we were doing is we were looking for an applique stitch, and I have my Bernina came with a cheat card. What you're looking for is a stitch that looks like this, number 78. So it's going to go out, it's going to go out, down, over, back out, down, back, over, back out. Most all machines, even just your basic line of machines, comes with a simple stitch like this. If you do not have this stitch, you can use a zigzag stitch as well. I have my machine set with an open toe foot, which is different than the regular foot in the fact that you can see the middle of it, whereas this foot, you can see where your seam line is, but you can't see where your stitching line is. So if your machine comes with an open toe foot, I definitely recommend switching to that. And then half the battle of this is just going to be getting to know your machine and what starts, what stops, what starts, what stops. So let's just start sewing. If your machine has a feature so that when it stops, it leaves the needle down, it's super helpful for this. The biggest thing you're going to notice I mess up is this machine has a manual up and down foot, whereas mine has an automatic. So let's see how we do. So what I'm doing is I'm just trying to get it so that those down stitches stay as close to the edge of the fabric as possible, and then the end stitches go onto the fabric to tack it in place. I am using white thread because I want you guys to be able to see it since this is the demonstration. If you are new to applique, I 1000% recommend using thread on the top that matches your fabric because it will hide your applique stitches if they're not perfect. But like I said, I want you guys to be able to see these stitches because I'm trying to teach you how to do it. So another tip, if you'll notice, the machine kind of has a tendency to, if I was to leave this fabric, it kind of has a tendency to curve anyway. So I am gently guiding the fabric. I am not pulling it, letting the machine do most of the work as I slowly go around this curve. All right, so I'm getting close to this corner. What I want to do is so I know I'm following the needle pattern, and what I want to do is when the needle is down in this pivot is when I want to stop, lift my presser foot, and move my fabric. Okay, so it just did its second stitch in, so now I'm going to lift this, put that needle down, and do another stitch. Okay, lift, do another stitch. Oh, see, there I did, presser foot. All right, now I'm back to where I started. And you can see kind of close up that looks like that did a pretty good job. I'm pretty happy with that. So here we have the finished applique horseshoe block. You're going to do the same thing as I mentioned earlier 2 more times, and then you're going to do the horses. Like I said, the horses are facing different directions. That's why there's 2 applique patterns, and it tells you in the pattern how many to cut of each one. Just a reminder, I know I said it before, but applique is reversed, which means horse block number 1, the guy's facing in. It's not this one, it's this one, because when you trace it and applique it, it's going to be facing the opposite direction. So this is horse block 1, which is this, even though it looks different. And then this is horse block 2, which is this, because it's mirror image and it's already mirrored for you. So that way you know how many to cut of each one so that your horses are facing the correct direction in your finished pattern. That's your assignment this week, is to get the horses and the horseshoes done, and then we will move on to the dressed in blocks next week.